Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 12th of February 2021. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let us now begin the discussion.
Dear students, RAU'S Prelims Test Series 2021 is a complete testing and revision course for the upcoming prelims examination. The program will help you prepare for UPSC prelims through a step-up approach. It is a meticulously designed study plan to organize your preparation and keep you on track towards covering the prelims GS and CSAT syllabus extensively from NCERT to the advanced level. The goal of our Prelims Test Series 2021 program is to exhaustively cover all standard sources of study material, including NCERT, with a study plan to test you at par with UPSC level of questions, thereby improving your chances of clearing the prelims examination. To give multiple revision of the entire syllabus from the perspective of civil service prelims pattern. The test series program will also give you the final revision of all topics and themes before the examination through QIP videos and prelims compass notes. The QIP videos or quality improvement program videos are for speedy revision of all important topics for the upcoming prelims examination. QIP videos are kind of crash course for the prelims examination. And prelims compass are 8 subject-wise prelims compilation of all static and current affair topics important for the upcoming prelims. RAU'S Prelims Test Series 2021 will include topics test, testing the concept of candidate. It will include thematic test on both the concept and the current affair of that particular theme. It will also include current affair tests covering the monthly current affairs. And there will be full-length test before the final exam to simulate you for the D-Day. There is a link in the description of this video. You can click on the link for registration and to also check out the demo QIP videos.
So the first article which we have taken for today's discussion appears on page number 7. Is India's digital services tax discriminatory or not? Now just last month, a USTR, that is United States Trade Representative investigation report found India's digital services tax to be discriminatory in nature. And it said the tax is inconsistent with prevailing principles of international taxation and burdens or restricts mainly US companies. Of course, India has denied these charges. And so in this respect, it is very, very important for us to understand this issue. Now, in order to understand this particular issue, there is a need for us to be aware about the fact that how digital services are different from traditional services, on what counts they are different, why it's so complicated to tax them. Once we have understood that, we are going to understand the taxation regime in India very, very succinctly with respect to the companies and how India is currently taxing digital services, which has led to USTR investigation into these taxes. So let us now begin the discussion. Now, first and foremost is that we need to realize that as humans evolve, as they develop, as newer technologies emerge, the way we provide goods and services to people changes, right? If you remember 20-30 years ago, the main way through which we used to get the goods and services was through brick and mortar system. But due to the third industrial revolution, which is mainly characterized by internet and increasing adoption of communication technology in day-to-day affair, now the services and goods are increasingly being provided over internet and communication technology. As these technologies emerged, the legal system obviously changed. And so in India also, we brought Information Technology Act 2000, which provided the legal recognition for transaction carried out by means of electronic data interchange and other means of electronic communication, which is of course commonly referred to as electronic commercial or electronic commerce. which involves the use of alternatives to paper-based methods of communication, storage of information, electronic filing of documents, and various other services, which are mainly carried out through electronic medium. And riding on electronic medium, riding on internet and communication technology, emerged digital economy, which basically refers to an economy that is based on digital computing technologies. Although we increasingly perceive this as conducting business through markets based on the internet and the World Wide Web. And so now every one of us knows that increasingly the trade and commerce is being carried over internet. But the problem is that the laws which we have at most of the places in the world, including India, the current taxation laws are redundant and they are not equipped to actually tax and bring this economy in jurisdiction. Let us understand how and why. Because you should always keep in mind that the current taxation laws, for example, Income Tax Act, the laws which actually lead to the taxation, have been designed to mainly tax the traditional businesses which have specific physical offices. They are selling goods or services where the locations are correctly identifiable, and so these tax rules have become redundant in the digital sphere. For example, whenever we want to tax a digital economy or digital services, there is always a problem of defining the scope of digital services. For example, the basic question, what is digital and what is not digital? What should be taxed under the digital label? And so in this respect, there are several trends that we can identify. For example, one of the trends is that some of the jurisdictions are trying to tax the data usage, which they consider as the main force behind the creation of the value. But so far, there is no globally accepted definition of what should be the scope of digital economy, what kind of activities would be termed as digital. Then comes the issue of jurisdiction. How do we determine the right place for paying the taxes? Now you should understand that fundamental debate here is not whether companies pay the right amount of tax, but whether they pay it in the right jurisdiction. Because most companies which dominate the digital economy are more often than not located in one country. Their offices or all the offices are concentrated in one country, but they are selling products and services across the globe. And so this creates problem because the existing taxation rules demand for the existence of company's office in particular country for that country to be able to tax it. And so this creates problem over there. Then comes the question of base of the tax. How will the tax base be determined? And there are debates around the accounting standards to be applied because the traditional accounting methods of traditional industries is not going to work over here. There are also no globally agreed standards as to how to calculate the profits and the losses of digital firms. And this has become problematic not just for developing countries like India and Brazil, but also for developed countries. And the best example to demonstrate that concern would be BEPS or base erosion and profit shifting or profit sharing. Because OECD countries or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development under the authority of Group of 20 countries or G20 has already considered ways to revise tax treaties, tighten rules and to share more government tax information under the BEPS project because they are also very worried about this idea. Firms make profit in one jurisdiction and shift them across borders by exploiting gaps and mismatches in tax rules to take advantage of lower tax rates and thus not paying tax in the country where the profit was actually made. And so this has led to consideration across the globe. Now to understand the high priority given by OECD countries, we have to rewind to 2013 when the BEPS program was launched by OECD. They launched 15 action points and out of those, the first point was the tax challenges of the digital economy. So you can understand that 15 points isolated by G20 countries on taxation, the first priority was given to taxation of digital economy. So this is the context in which India's recent actions have been challenged or have been questioned by USTR. And so in order to understand why these recent initiatives by Government of India to tax digital services have been questioned, very briefly we have to look into India's taxation regime. Now taxation rules for individuals and companies are different and there are only two conditions in which a person or an individual can be taxed by Indian government. The first, of course, is that if he or she is a resident of India, obviously. And the second is, of course, that the income of that individual or person should accrue or arise in India or deemed to have accrued in India. So, of course, if your income is generated from an activity in India or you are a resident of India, in both these cases, the government of India is going to tax you. What about the companies? Now, in companies also, there are two kinds of companies. One is domestic companies. Another one, of course, is multinational companies. So, to tax a domestic company, the rules are very clear. There is Income Tax Act 1961, which has laid very clear-cut guidelines. And so, there is no ambiguity as to how to tax a domestic company. However, the rules to tax MNCs, and especially the MNCs operating in digital sphere, are not clear. They are very vague and ambiguous, and that is where the whole debate arises. Now, as far as digital MNCs are concerned, in that two kinds of MNCs distinction can be made. One of them is doing business with India or with Indians. Second is doing business in India. Now, doing business with India involves foreign companies being engaged in business transactions with the residents of our country, for example, with Indians, wherein these companies conduct their business activities without setting up a business presence in India. For instance, selling products to its residents. Such foreign companies are not taxable in our country, and there is no dispute as to whether they should be taxed or not. But the question arises about the companies, MNCs, who are doing business in India digitally. Now, in this case, the company undertakes business activities in India by establishing formal presence. And so let us understand these companies. So not only do these companies establish their formal presence in our country, but they also hire employees and agents and carry out their work utilizing them. And so they have significant economic presence. Now, for India to be able to tax these companies, they should have significant economic presence. And for that, of course, you need establishments. But the problem with these digital MNCs is that they barely have any establishment. Even if they have establishment, they are very, very small offices because everything is being governed from headquarters and through cloud services. And so with the advent of digital markets and digital economy, the concept of permanent establishment has undergone drastic change. Because so far in tax laws, economic presence is always connected with establishment. And since these companies have very small establishment or even no establishment at all, it becomes very, very difficult to tax them because most of the taxes are on properties and on incomes derived from these properties. But how these companies operate is very different. For example, Uber, which is the world's largest taxi company without owning any vehicle. Similarly, you can say that Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, also the owner of WhatsApp and Instagram, creates no content at all. And similarly, Alibaba, the world's one of the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. And so it becomes a real challenge to tax these companies from the incomes which they are deriving from cars in India, from content makers in India, and from the people who are enlisting themselves on Airbnb app. Because these companies are, after all, charging both the consumer as well as the provider for the services these apps provide. And so there is a lot of vagueness and opaqueness in the way these companies operate. The government of India started taking a lot of steps since 2016. Now you need to understand that advertising in India is a taxable service. And so all those companies which are registered in India pay taxes, but such activities carried out by digital companies located, let's say, in US, for example, Google and Facebook, were not paying any taxes simply because they were utilizing the loophole of our taxation, because they used to claim that they do not have economic presence, because they do not have establishment. And so government of India applied 6% equalization levy. Equalization means to bring you equal to your competitors in India. So for example, if there is a company A which is doing advertising in our country, paying taxes, let's say at the rate of T%, and then there is another company called FB or Facebook doing the same advertisement in a better way, targeting more people and earning more revenues, is not paying any tax. And so the government of India applied the same taxes on them also. So this created a big problem with companies in US because most of the companies are located in US, and so this equalization levy had most impact on US companies. Then in 2020, because of which the USTR has opened up investigation, is 2% tax that India has charged since April 2020 on revenues from digital services. And remember that this is a tax not on profits but on revenues. And again, this has been imposed on companies which are not registered in our country. Then in 2018, government amended Income Tax Act, widening the definition of economic presence, because earlier economic presence mainly meant physical presence. But now, if a digital company has users in India, that company would be categorized as one which has economic presence in India and hence becomes eligible for taxation. Although this provision has not come into effect, mainly because of the treaties involved in it, but as soon as the treaties are amended, this provision will kick in. And similar to the levy of equalization tax on advertising firms in 2016, the government of India expanded the equalization levy on e-commerce companies as well. So earlier it was restricted to just advertising services, but now all those e-commerce companies, for example Amazon, will have to pay equalization levy simply because companies registered in India are paying the taxes, but foreign companies are not paying the taxes. And so we can say that India in a sense has become a torch bearer as far as taxation of digital economy is concerned, and this has ruffled a lot of feathers with US. And so in this context, this news appears where it talks about the recent investigation which has been opened by USTR, which is nothing but the representation of all the private companies in US, which has openly criticized the taxation of digital services by India, calling it inconsistent with prevailing principles. Now, since there are no prevailing principles, we understood that how there is no consensus in G20 countries as to how to tax these digital services, there are no conventions, and so there is a lack of global consensus. India is free to do whatever it wants to and however it wants to tax these companies as far as it is fair. Then similarly, USTR has alleged that these taxes are targeted towards US companies. It is true that most companies impacted because of these taxes would be US companies, but the simple reason is US companies dominate the digital services market. Around 80% of the companies operating in digital sphere are registered originating in US. And so whenever we will levy any kind of taxes on digital services, the impact would be maximally felt on US companies. That is true. Then they have alleged that these rules are devoid of any kind of public consultation. These companies allege that they were not consulted by the government before levying these taxes, which is also true. And then finally, one of the issues raised by them is that India has taxed the revenues, because if you notice here, 2% on revenues. And so they say that the taxes are always or should always be on profits earned and not on revenues, because revenues are not the same as profits. So this matter is an evolving situation. But some important concepts have been discussed. For example, BEPS, on which a question has already been asked in prelims examination. What is the trouble as far as taxation of these digital companies are concerned, and how India has resorted to tax these companies? Let us now move on to the next article. Cleanup begins on Kerala beach appears on page number 8. So as we already know that there was a furnace oil leak into the sea, and so an emergency cleanup was launched along the coast 2 days ago. Because roughly around 5,000 liters of furnace oil leaked into sea following a pipeline rupture on Wednesday morning. And so this incident has sparked vehement protests by local people alleging gross negligence on behalf of the company, which is acronymed as TTP or Travancore Titanium Products Limited. Now the images which you see on your screen are not some painting done by a modern artist, but rather these are the images of oil spills. When oil gets mixed with the oceanic water, these are the kind of patterns it produces, and obviously it leads to the pollution of the water. And so in this regard, since oil spill has been highlighted in this particular news article, what we are going to do is that first we will have a clear-cut understanding as to what oil spill actually is, how it is caused, what are its various impacts. Of course, economic is one, but environmental and human cost of oil spill should also be discussed. And then finally we'll discuss how to deal a situation of oil spill, mainly focusing on the removal of the oil from the water and what are the processes which can be involved to do that. Simply speaking, oil spill is basically leakage of petroleum onto the surface of large body of water. Although oil spills can be in the ground as well, but they become more so problematic when the injection of large amount of hydrocarbons or liquid petroleum into water takes place. So oil spill refers to release of liquid petroleum, hydrocarbon, crude oil into environment, and especially into the marine ecosystem, mainly due to human activities. And now, oil spill is quite a recent phenomena. And most of the major oil spills which have been reported so far are from post 1960s eras. Because oil spills mainly take place as a result of intensified petroleum exploration and production on continental shelves. Because ultimately these pipelines, when they transfer the oil from the wells to the refineries, in between if there is some rupture in the oil pipeline, then oil spill takes place. Apart from that, the increasing usage of super tankers or very large tankers or cargo ships that can carry up to 5 lakh tons of oil. And as the usage of these super tankers increased, a lot of oil spills took place due to damaged super tankers. Now, of course, the contribution from super tankers has been reduced because of stringent shipping and environmental regulations in the shipping industry. So let us now discuss the impacts of these oil spill. To start with, of course, it is a pollution of marine water. Anything unwanted mixed with water makes it polluted. And so, one of the direct consequences or negative impacts of these oil spills is the pollution of the water. Apart from that, oil spills also leads to air pollution as well, because oil carry a lot of chemicals, especially the crude oil. And you have to remember that these hydrocarbons are volatile in nature because they contain benzenes, toluenes, polyaromatic hydrocarbons and oxygenated polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. All these are volatile in nature, which basically means that these are substances that are easily evaporated even at normal temperatures. And so if this is the ocean water and this is the oil spill, and you have to remember that oil has a lower specific gravity than water, which basically means it is lighter, and so it will be placed at the topmost layer of the ocean water. And so the evaporation of these toxic substances from the top layer of the oil spill will obviously deteriorate the water quality as well as the air quality. Then let us talk about the impact of oil spills on biodiversity. And so, of course, the addition of oil as a top layer in the water not only kills fishes but also suffocates a lot of marine animals. For example, it destroys the insulating ability of fur-bearing mammals, such as sea otters. We know that whales and dolphins have to come to the top surface of the water in order to take the oxygen from the atmosphere. They don't have the capability to separate oxygen from water. And the top layer as oil clogs blowholes of whales and dolphins, making it impossible for them to breathe properly and disrupting their ability to communicate also. Then, when exposed to oil, adult fish may be poisoned and may experience reduced growth, enlarged livers, changes in heart and respiration rates, fin erosion, and reproduction impairment. Then we know that top layer of the water is the one through which the exchange of the oxygen takes place, and if you cut off that layer with the oil, there will be no exchange of oxygen from the air to water. And since oil forms a film on the surface, it reduces the amount of light and oxygen passing into the water. This suffocates marine life or causes it to go into the state of heat coma. Then it also impacts the aerial life as well, because you should know that birds have feathers which repel water. Now, oil mixed with water devoids them of the ability to repel water and insulate them from cold air, and hence their insulation from cold water is drastically reduced. Also, it leads to mass death of birds because they obviously can't fly with wings coated by heavy oil, and then also disrupts the migratory pattern of the birds. So when the areas where these migrating birds normally stop is contaminated, obviously their pattern is disrupted. Then apart from that, oil spills also damage nesting grounds, potentially causing serious long-term effects on entire species. Then of course the impact on humans is not difficult to think of. So immediately, first and foremost, it is a fire hazard because hydrocarbon is inflammable, and that is why we need hydrocarbons after all to derive energy. And so since they are very inflammable, if they reach coast, threat of fire hazard. Then Oil spill contaminates food supply as oil spills make fishes unsafe for humans to eat. Spilled oil can also contaminate drinking water supplies. And apart from all these, it ruins aesthetics as when an oil spill reaches a beach, it coats and clings to every rock and grain of sand. And so that is why there is a need for a response against oil spills and ultimately removal of all the oil from the spilled area. And so when we talk about response, there are three immediate measures which needs to be taken. First and foremost, the task is to prevent the spill from reaching the shore. Then, if you have ensured that, there is a need to reduce the impact on marine life. There is a need to speed the degradation of any unrecovered oil. And both these form the part of removal process. And there are various ways through which an oil spill or most of the oil in a spilled area can be removed. And let us understand that. So obviously we can utilize one of the properties of hydrocarbon, which is that they are inflammable, and so we can burn the oil spill in situ. But the only problem is that it can be followed only when the speed of the wind is very, very low, because otherwise it is going to cause a hell lot of air pollution which is going to spread in a very, very large area. Then the next process which is utilized to solve the problem of oil spill or remove the oil spill is called skimming. And as we have already discussed, oil has a lower specific gravity than seawater and floats on the top seawater for that reason, which makes skimming one of the most effective and immediate ways to remove crude oil from seawater. Skimming removes oil from the sea before it reaches sensitive areas along the coastline. But it is not as simple as it sounds. Removing oil from seawater through skimming can be very, very difficult because this is not a still water. It has currents, it has waves, and it also has tides. And so the distribution of oil in water has a very, very complex pattern, and so skimming is always not the best way to remove the oil. Then comes the vacuum and centrifuge, in which the mixture of oil and water is sucked, and then a centrifuge is used to separate the oil from water, allowing a tanker to be filled with near pure oil. Usually the water is returned to the sea, making the process more efficient. Then comes the dispersion, and especially the chemical dispersion. Now, what is a disperant? Now, these are chemicals that are sprayed on a surface oil slick to break down the oil into smaller droplets that more readily mix with water. So we know that oil or hydrocarbon are not generally soluble in water. And so what disperants do is that they break down these large hydrocarbons so that they become more soluble with water. And so disperants do not reduce the amount of oil entering the environment, but push the effects of the spill underwater. And these smaller droplets are easy on bacteria to act upon. So these are natural decomposers, we know that. But the trouble is that they are less effective against large hydrocarbons as compared to the smaller ones. So what we have done is that we have broken down the large hydrocarbons to be acted upon by the microbes to decompose this oil. And the final is, of course, the bioremediation method, which refers to the use of specific microorganisms to remove any toxic or harmful substances. And there are various classes of bacteria, fungi, archaea, and algae that degrade petroleum products by metabolizing and breaking them down into simpler and non-toxic molecules. And one of the examples is oil zapper, which is essentially a cocktail of 5 different bacterial strains that detoxifies oily sludges and cleans up oil slick. So this was a very, very relevant discussion, especially from the perspective of prelims examination, where you could be expected to know about the causes of oil spills, their impacts, and also the processes which can be utilized to remove the spilled oil from the water. So let us now see editorial page and understand why we have not covered other articles. Starting with the lead article. So lead article is the one which appears on the editorial page right beside the columns. So the left 2 vertical articles which you see are called columns, and right beside the top article is known as lead article, which is the agonizing cost of ham-handed development, which mainly talks about the impact of development and the factor which this kind of development has played in the recent flash flood at Chamoli in Uttarakhand. Now there is nothing new in this particular editorial. This phenomena, along with the causes and its impact, has already been discussed by Faizan sir this week only. Then the column towards the left of that, order at the border. deals with the disengagement at the LOC, where India and China have finally reached an agreement on disengagement at Pangong Lake. Now, all the regular followers of DNS know that this topic has been discussed multiple times over, starting with the basic discussion on LAC, what this engagement was all about, and finally the disengagement process has begun, and so there is nothing new to discuss over there. Then comes the article in Biden's policy pursuit, the World Order Challenge. This article discusses the change in presidency in United States and how it is going to impact the current situation in Iran. Of course, this has already been discussed in the DNS, and also it is not very relevant for UPSC examination because it mainly concerns with the impact of policies of various countries on India. Of course, the US sanctions on Iran have impacted India, but apart from that, there is nothing else to be taken from this particular article. Then comes the lower column article, which is the tender cut, which talks about the government's statement about bringing in a law on cryptocurrencies, which according to this column is a welcome step. Now, in this regard, on 31st January 2021, that is just the last week, Baswa sir has already done a very elaborate discussion on the problems arising out of regulation of cryptocurrencies, what are the recommendations of Subhash Chandra Garg committee, and various other perspectives related to it. Then, the first article which we took for discussion is India's Digital Services Tax Discriminatory, is there on the page number 7, and a resilient future for Uttarakhand. Again talks about the same calamity, which is the flash floods in Uttarakhand, which has already been discussed. Then a news appears on page number 5, Assam-Mizoram border tense, blockade on. And this deals with the dispute between Assam and Mizoram, which has already been discussed in great detail by Naveed sir.